You're driving down a 2-lane road just outside of town, the kind that doesn't get a lot of traffic after dark. There's a creek off to the right, a row of trees on the left. You've taken this road before, but tonight it feels different. The air is too still. The curve ahead looks sharper than you remember. That's when you see her. She's standing near the shoulder just before the bend. Long white dress, barefoot, hair down. She's facing away, but you don't need to see her face to know something's wrong. She's too quiet, too still. You don't stop, but when you glance back, she's gone. Stories like that don't make the papers, but they stick around. Almost every region has one. A woman in white seen near a road, a bridge, a river. Always at night, always alone. People say she's a ghost. Some say she's a warning. Nobody really wants to find out. Depending on where you're from, she has a name. In the Southwest, she's Llorona. In the Midwest, she's Resurrection Mary. And in Ireland, she's the Banshee. Different names, different languages, same basic shape. A woman lost something. Sometimes it was taken from her. Sometimes she gave it up. Either way, the loss didn't end with her death. It just kept going. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist, and today we're talking about the Lady in White. We'll look at where she shows up, what the legends say about her, and why so many cultures tell the same story about a woman who wouldn't stay buried. There are ghost stories all over the world about women in white. Sometimes they're crying. Sometimes they're walking. Sometimes they're just standing still on the side of the road. But the shape of the story stays the same. It usually starts with a woman who suffered a major loss, her child, her partner, or her own life. She dies under tragic circumstances. Then people start seeing her. She doesn't talk much. She doesn't finish what she starts. And she rarely leaves the place where she was last alive. These stories show up in different forms across time and culture, but they're all doing the same thing. They're explaining a kind of grief that didn't get closure. Sometimes that grief turns into a curse. Sometimes it turns into a warning. But it just doesn't go away. Let's look at 3 of the better-known figures who carry this structure. La Llorona, Resurrection Mary, and the Banshee. Now, each one comes from a different culture, but they all mark the same spot in the road. La Llorona means weeping woman. If you grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, you've heard her name. Most people hear this story before they're old enough to really understand it. The versions vary, but the outline is consistent. A woman, usually named Maria, falls in love with a man who either abandons her or refuses to claim their children. Out of grief or rage, she kills them, usually by drowning. Sometimes she dies right after, sometimes she doesn't. What matters is that after death, she doesn't pass on. She's heard crying along riverbanks, near irrigation canals, in alleyways or back roads. She's searching for her children, and if you hear her wail, that's supposed to be a sign that danger's nearby. In some communities, she's used to scare children away from open water. In others, she's treated more like an omen, especially if something bad is about to happen. Floods, accidents, sudden death. There are still sightings reported today, and not just in Mexico. You'll find stories all over the American Southwest and Central America. Some scholars trace La Llorona back to indigenous roots. One connection is an Aztec goddess associated with childbirth, death, and protection. She was known to appear at night, weeping for her children. After colonization, stories like hers were often reshaped by Catholic morality. The result was a figure like La Llorona, punished, restless, and tied to both motherhood and sin. So even though people tell the story to scare their children, it's really about more than that. It's about a woman who couldn't grieve the right way and who was never allowed to stop. Resurrection Mary is one of the most famous ghost stories in the United States. Her story centers on Archer Avenue near Resurrection Cemetery, just outside of Chicago. Sightings started in the 1930s. People said they saw a young woman in white walking alone along the side of the road. Sometimes she was picked up by drivers. She asked to be taken towards the cemetery, but before they arrived, she disappeared. Some say she was a girl who went dancing at the Willowbrook Ballroom in the 1920s or 30s. Maybe she had an argument. Maybe she left early. Either way, she was hit by a car and killed on the road. Her family buried her in a white dress and dancing shoes. Since then, these stories have not stopped. A cab driver in 1973 claimed a girl got into the back seat of his car, gave an address near the cemetery, and vanished before they arrived. In another story from 1976, a passerby claimed to see a woman inside the cemetery, pressing her hands so hard against the bars that she left visible marks. The iron was reportedly bent, and the prints stayed for decades. What makes Resurrection Mary different is that she's not angry. She doesn't scream. She doesn't chase anyone. She just keeps trying to get home. That detail is what keeps the story alive. People don't see her as dangerous. They see her as stuck. A teenager who never made it home. A girl who still wants to dance. Now, in Irish folklore, the Banshee isn't exactly a ghost. She's more like a spirit of warning, tied to death but not responsible for it. The name comes from an Irish word meaning woman of the fairy mound. She appears when someone is about to die, usually someone from a specific family line. Traditionally, the Banshee doesn't show up for just anyone. Her presence is inherited. She's said to appear for families with old Gaelic surnames. The descriptions vary, but some say she's an old woman in rags. Others describe her as a young woman in a white or gray dress with red eyes from crying. In all versions, she wails. That's her role. She's not there to cause death. She's there to mark it. Historically, keening women were hired mourners, real people who would sing or cry at funerals to express grief. The Banshee might have started there, but over time she became more supernatural. Now her wail is seen as a sign that someone in the family is about to pass. She doesn't hurt anyone, but she can't be stopped. And that's what gives her power. She's not a restless ghost. She's grief that works on a schedule. In the Philippines, the White Lady of Balete Drive haunts taxi drivers. In Portugal, the Dama Branca appears to travelers who veer off course. And in Japan, Korea, and Thailand, similar spirits show up near water, on bridges, or at abandoned buildings. Sometimes they're said to be the ghosts of betrayed women. Some were killed by their families. and sometimes they were just left behind. The details shift, but the look stays the same. White dress, pale face, alone, and watching you. In many cultures, white is the color of mourning. It's what the dead are buried in. It's worn at funerals. It signals transition, not just death, but the space between. That's part of what makes these figures recognizable. Their clothing isn't just symbolic, it's ritual. They're not just women, they're warnings. They show up at the edge of where something went wrong, and then they stay there. The Lady in White isn't just a ghost story, she's a working symbol. And if you practice any form of folk magic, ancestor work, or spirit communication, she's a pattern you need to understand. At her core, she represents three forces: grief, injustice, and memory. That's what keeps her from passing on. Not a curse, not unfinished business in the Hollywood sense, but something that didn't get acknowledged, something that was too heavy to die clean. In magical terms, we call this unrested energy. It's not always dangerous, but it's not quiet either. And it tends to show up when something old is trying to be seen again, especially generational pain that can no longer be ignored or buried. So why does she appear? Now, when spirits like the Lady in White show up in folk stories or real hauntings, they're usually tied to one of a few things: a death that wasn't mourned properly, or a person whose grief was punished or silenced. A threshold space, maybe, like water, or bridges or roadways, where something ended but didn't get resolved. And that's where the energy lingers. It doesn't act like a soul with a personality. It acts more like a bruise that never healed. If you live in a place long enough or work with spirits often enough, you'll start to feel that difference. These aren't spirits that want attention. They want recognition. And there's a difference. In ancestor work, they sometimes show up not because they're part of your bloodline, but because you've opened the kind of door they know how to walk through. You don't have to call them. They come when the resonance is right. This is especially true if you're working with grief, yours or someone else's, and you haven't set clear boundaries around what you're willing to carry. So in ritual settings, figures like the Lady in White might show up as images in scrying, as shadows near mirrors, or emotional shifts in the room. That doesn't mean they're literal ghosts. It means the space you opened matched something that wasn't already looking for an outlet. Sometimes they come through dreams, sometimes trance. Occasionally they come through mirrors. Now, if they do, it won't be dramatic. It feels more like a shift, a weight or pressure on the air. And here's the key. This isn't possession. It's just a pattern. If your work taps into unresolved grief, especially around women, children, or loss, you might get more than just your intended outcome. You might tap into a collective grief that's been walking for generations. Now, not every practitioner is equipped to work with unrested spirits, and not every spirit wants to be worked with. So here's the basic rule. If you can't approach with respect and clarity, don't approach at all. You don't summon the Lady in White for entertainment. You don't invite her in to prove a point to someone else. And you don't try to fix her. You can, however, make space for her. In some Latino and Filipino traditions, practitioners will keep a white candle and water on their ancestor altar specifically for unnamed or unrested women, not to feed the ghost, but to acknowledge the wound, to say, I know your story didn't end right. In Irish and Appalachian traditions, it's common to keep mirrors covered or turned inward during mourning, especially if someone passed suddenly or under stress. That would be considered more boundary work than superstition. And in hoodoo, you might bury grief at a crossroads to help it move on, or use a white cloth, or rose petals, or silver coins as offerings to spirits who need to be seen but not invited in. If you're an empath, a medium, or just energetically open, these spirits can stick to your energy field. It's not out of malice. It's more out of resonance. It's like a tuning fork. They vibrate with what's already shaking. This is why protection work matters, not to keep them out, but to make sure you're not absorbing what doesn't belong to you. So if you feel heavy after hearing these stories or after visiting places where these sightings are common, reset your boundaries. Wash your hands in salt water, maybe cover your mirrors, and speak out loud. What is not mine may return to the road. These are simple practices, but they work. The lady in white, across all her forms, functions like a mirror. She reflects what hasn't been dealt with. If she's crying, the question is, where has mourning been ignored? If she's luring people off the road, ask, what path wasn't safe to begin with? And if she's watching in silence, it means something's still being buried. All this from a magical perspective, that's all that matters. This is grief as a sigil, repetition as power. Every time her story is told, it changes the pattern again, which is why she keeps showing up in dreams, in rituals, in stories, even when no one invites her. She's not there to teach you a lesson. She's there because something still hasn't been acknowledged. And in folk magic, that's usually where the work begins. There's always one road in these stories. Locals will tell you it's just a shortcut, but they won't take it after dark. Sometimes it's a bridge or a curve. Sometimes just a long stretch of highway with too many wreaths nailed to the trees. That's where she shows up. You'll hear the same story in a dozen places. A driver sees a woman at the side of the road. Once again, white dress, barefoot, her head is down. She doesn't speak, or if she does, it's just to ask for a ride. Sometimes she'll point. Sometimes she disappears before you ever stop. And either way, she's never there when you go back. People call these vanishing hitchhiker stories, and they've been around for decades. And they don't seem to be going away anytime soon. White Rock Lake in Dallas has one of the oldest versions. Since the 1940s, drivers have reportedly picked up a soaking wet woman who asked to be taken home. When they get to the address, she's gone. The story always ends the same way. The person who answers the door said she drowned years ago. Union Cemetery in Connecticut has another. The white lady there is said to drift across the road at night. Some drivers have swerved to avoid her. Some say she left handprints on the hood of their car. And paranormal investigators have stalked out that area looking for her. One claimed to capture her on video. Whether you believe that or not, the locals still cross themselves when they drive past. These aren't just stories passed around for fun. They're tied to actual places, and the people who live near them act accordingly. Whether they believe in ghosts or not, they've made room for the story, and that road becomes a part of the haunting. In almost every version, there's no resolution. The woman never gets home. The driver never gets an answer. The story repeats itself without a clean ending, and that's part of the pattern. It's not the fear that stays with you, it's the unfinished business. When people talk about these sightings, they don't describe fear so much as unease. They remember how the air felt or how the silence was charged with energy, how it didn't feel quite right to say anything afterwards. That's what tells you there's something deeper going on. These stories don't stick because they're scary. They stick because they're familiar to us, because we know what it means to carry grief that doesn't go anywhere. You don't need to believe in ghosts to feel what that does to a place. The woman in white is part of the landscape now. She marks the places where something didn't heal, where someone was lost, where silence set in too fast. And sometimes she doesn't need to do anything at all. Just being there is enough to say, my life didn't end right, and no one's able to fix it. And now as we move on to the spell section of our story, it's important to say the lady in white isn't just one ghost. She isn't tied to one place or one name. She's a recurring shape. She's a pattern that shows up when grief doesn't get a resolution. When you work with magic or spirit, you'll run into this kind of presence. It's not always loud, not always dangerous, but it's heavy. It sits in a space and it waits. And if you're open, you'll feel it before you see it. You don't have to clear that energy out unless it's causing harm. But you do need to know how to separate what's yours from what isn't. So to close this episode, I want to offer a ritual, a small boundary spell for anyone doing grief work or ancestor work or living in a space that tends to carry other people's sorrow. It's especially helpful if you tend to take on energy that isn't yours. So what you'll need is a small piece of white cloth, a pinch of salt, some dried rose petals, you can use either white or red, a piece of jet or obsidian or hematite, and a black string or ribbon. And you're going to lay the white cloth out flat and place the salt, the rose petals, and the stone in the center. Fold the cloth around the contents like a small bundle or mojo bag and wrap it tightly with a black ribbon. Hold the bundle and say something to the effect of, "This grief is not mine to carry. What calls may pass. What lingers may move on." Then you place the bundle near your bed or your altar or wherever you feel the need to move the energy the most. You can change the contents once a month, bury the old bundle, or return it to moving water if you're done with it. So it's important to know this isn't a spell to shut spirits out. It's a filter. It lets you stay present with the work without being pulled under by something you didn't ask for. I'm Papa G, and this has been the Feral Folklorist. Next time, we're opening something that should have stayed sealed. A story about a small wooden box, a spirit that clings, and the folkloric roots of one of the internet's most famous so-called cursed objects. We're talking the Dybbuk box. Displaced souls, spiritual attachment, and what really happens when you bring haunted grief into your home, thinking it's just a conversation piece. But for now, if you're out driving at night and you see that white lady standing at the edge of the road, keep driving. If you'd like to hear the After the Show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Aromagees Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.